Uh, Good evening, Professor Bozeman.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Is it a little late for you right now, or?
Well, I'm kind of a late person anyway, so no, I would never be to bed before. I got 3 hours to go before I go to bed, so I'm fine.
Are you in Atlanta? You're in Atlanta, right?
Well, I'm near Atlanta. We have a cabin in the Georgia mountains on the lake, and
Oh,
kind
I
of.
see.
But I was a little worried about whether my Zoom would work here because we don't have a great connection. But it doesn't seem to be much problem, so I'm relieved. Where are you?
Great. I think I just wanted to check whether the share screen, because you mentioned that you'll be using slides. So,
That's my nine. No slides. No.
oh, you are not going to use slides. Oh, okay, I see. So then I don't think we need to use the share screen then.
No, no problem.
Okay. Yeah, we're really looking forward to the keynote speech, and then I believe we'll start at 9:40 our time, but 10:40 in South Korea.
Great, that sounds good.
Okay.
You're in,
How's sorry?
are you in Illinois? Is that where you are? Where are you located now?
I'm in Detroit, Michigan.
Oh, you're Wayne State, right?
Yes. So we're in the Eastern time zone.
Yeah, I know, right.
Today is really hot today. Is it really hot in Atlanta? Georgia?
It's hot everywhere. The place I live is usually 10 degrees cooler, and it's breaking records tomorrow for all-time high. So you can't escape it. This is not, well, at least I'm not in Phoenix, which is where I usually am. So that part's good.
I see. So I think I heard that you are retiring this academic year or end of this year, or is that your plan?
Yeah, that actually I already have May,
Oh,
end of May. But you know, it's like most Americans, I'm sure you understand, when we retire, we only retire from some things. So I've got a couple of book contracts underway and a grant. So, you know, it's not exactly going on vacation, but of course don't want to. I'm perfectly happy to keep working on things not unlike what I'm talking about tonight, which is one of the things I'm interested in. We have a project that's going to lead to a few publications at least. But yeah, so the main thing I'm looking forward to is just a little bit more family time than I have had, more mobility, easier to go places. So not too many changes.
that's great. Will you be going back to Arizona, like Phoenix?
Oh yeah, right. We really like Arizona except in the summer. So yeah, and my daughter lives there and
Oh,
my
I
grandson. So I have a daughter here too and a son. So it's a very good lifestyle being able to split time. But yeah, so we really like Phoenix. We really don't like it in the summertime. But I wouldn't want to be in Detroit now in the summertime either. So there's just other place.
I think this summer it's very humid compared to like last year.
Yeah. Well, it's always humid here, so
Oh,
can't
I
do much.
see.
Yeah. I used to live in Michigan. Briefly, I was on leave at University of Michigan
Oh,
and
I see.
quite a while ago, but I picked the year they had the lowest temperature ratings ever in the history of Ann Arbor. So, so my wife decided maybe we wouldn't go there permanently. She was happy.
I think my colleagues who are retiring is moving or have a home either in North Carolina or in the Florida. So
Yeah.
I have two upcoming retirement, and I know in the winter semester, they're doing like a phase retirement. So in the winter semester, they're in Florida. So
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what I'd planned to do a couple of years ago, but the president of my university talked me out of it and asked me to stay on a little bit longer. So I did. he and I were writing a book, so it seemed like a good idea to continue there for a while longer until we finished it.
Oh, is it Professor Michael Crow that you're referring to?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Oh, and then thank you for sending the link to your new book.
Sure.
And I'm wondering, do you want to share the link to the open access version of your book in this session? I can share it in the chat if you want, but I wanted to check in with you before I put it in the chat, whatever you prefer.
I strongly prefer that you share it with anybody you possibly can.
Okay, so when during your speech, I'll find the link and then put it in the chat then.
That sounds great.
Okay, thank you. Professor Patria Lancer Jonas, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you.
How are you? It's 7:36 in Albuquerque, right? Are you in Albuquerque?
Yes.
So I think both of us are in Eastern time zone, so it's 9:40 for us.
Oh, where are you?
I'm in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
And I'm near Atlanta, but I have a home in the Georgia mountains, so it's a heat escape.
Oh, that's good. Yes.
But you live in one of my favorite places. I love New Mexico.
Oh,
I get
yes.
there, but that's I go there a lot.
You do?
Yeah, no. Well, I live most of the time in Phoenix, so it's
Yeah.
a harsh commute. But yeah, we every time we travel east, we always stop off, and usually in Albuquerque and Santa Fe.
Okay. Yeah,
Really
I was
like it.
thinking that maybe you were still in Arizona. I didn't know where you were. No.
Well, I am staying in Arizona, but we just get away every summer. So we'll be going back. I was just explaining I've got one daughter in Arizona, another one in Atlanta, so it's
Oh,
easy. Yeah.
that's easy. So you split your time.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Nice.
How long have you been in Albuquerque?
We just moved last August.
Oh.
So new first summer, I guess, here, although I've been traveling a lot. But
Yeah.
I tell you, I mean, it's been like up and down there. Now we are in the monsoon season.
I always know. I'm quite familiar, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so 69 degrees, which is like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Where did you move there from?
New York City.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's different, but it's nice. It's very nice. I really like it here.
Oh yeah, I like it a lot too. I lived in New York for many years. I used to teach at the Maxwell School at Syracuse for 15 years. So and that's not New York City, obviously, but we got there a lot. So
Yeah, within train distance.
right, exactly, because that's how I got there. I used to love. Well, I still love to take trains. I just don't have any to take.
Right.
Trains left me. I didn't leave them.
Did you have any special instructions or anything like that? Or
For tonight,
yeah, for us.
I did send the timetable,
Yes.
so I think we will follow that timetable. The only instruction that I had for the audience is that we'll just do Q&A at the very end. But since we're on Zoom, if there's any questions, they can put it in the chat, but we'll address all of the questions at the end. Is
Okay.
that okay?
Sounds good.
So what would be the ideal amount of time for me to talk?
About 20 to 25 minutes. I assigned about 25 minutes, but we can have more Q&A time if needed.
Okay, well, I got my timer on, so we're safe.
And I was gonna ask you, is this being broadcasted also at the conference or not? Or this is just on Zoom?
No, I believe there's because the domestic sessions, the sessions in Korean is in person. It's the international sessions that are being done virtually. So I believe there's a room that is broadcasting this session, but I do not know who's in the audience because we
Yeah.
can't really see the audience right now. So without further ado, it's 9:40 in my Eastern time, but it's 10:40 a.m. in South Korea. So I believe we should start this session then. Okay, so welcome to the opening plenary of 2022 Korean Association for Public Administration's International Conference. Thank you for coming to this session. My name is Kyu Nam-jan, and I'm an associate professor and the director of Master of Public Administration program at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. I'm honored to actually very humbled and honored to moderate this session, moderate this opening plenary session. The theme of 2022 KAPA conference is Green Digital, COVID-19, Rethinking Public Administration in an Era of Great Transformation. To explore these issues, we have the pleasure of having two distinguished scholars in our field, Professor Barry Bozeman and Professor Patria de Lancer Jonas as keynote speakers. Before our keynote speakers address, first I would like to introduce Professor Suk-yeon Won from Ewha Women's University, the current president of Korean Association for Public Administration, for her opening remarks today. Professor Won, the floor is yours. Oh, she was just here. Yes.
Hello, this is Suk-yeon Won, the president of Korean Association of Public Administration. I greatly appreciate your participation in the 2022 KAPA Summer International Conference. I'm very honored and very excited to meet prominent scholars and researchers and from more than 40 countries. It is personally regrettable that we are not able to meet in person at this moment, but at the same time, I think in some ways, online offers new possibilities and opportunities for us. Especially the online conference allows us to expand the horizon of our academic activities, going beyond the traditional physical and temporal constraints. I believe today's opening plenary will be an evidence of this unlimited possibility. It is a huge privilege to have two renowned scholars, Professor Barry Bozeman and Professor Patria de Lancer Jones, as our keynote speakers for this opening plenary. I would like to express my special gratitude to our two keynote speakers who willingly responded to KAPA's invitation. Thank you, Dr. Bozeman and Dr. de Lancer Jones. The theory of dimensional publicness proposed by Dr. Bozeman and the book Public Interest and Public Values have provided invaluable insights for many scholars and researchers, including myself. I am also delighted to host Dr. de Lancer Jones, the president-elect of ASPA, who is an expert in government capability, citizen participation, and performance measurement. It's been somewhat limited over the last 2 years because of the pandemic, but I look forward to continued collaboration and cooperation between KAPA and ASPA under Patria's leadership. As you all know, the main theme of this conference is Green Digital COVID-19, rethinking public administration in an era of the great transformation. This theme echoes the most challenging and pressing concerns of our societies. Given the social, economic, and political consequences of this COVID pandemic, we are asked to generate more realistic and sustainable solutions to them. In order to do so, we would discuss future of government going beyond the legacy government, new forms of collaborative and democratic governance, as well as the resilience of our society after the pandemic. In that sense, I cannot wait to hear and learn from our keynote speakers for the invaluable insights. I also do not have any doubt this opening plenary will be a time for reflection to reaffirm the true value of publicness, especially in an era of the great transformation. Once again, I would like to express my special thanks to our two keynote speakers for being here. And lastly, thank you for your joining us today. And I hope we will all be able to meet in person to share our thoughts, perspectives, and insights in the near future. Thank you very much.
President Won, thank you for the wonderful welcome message. Before we invite our distinguished speakers to the floor, I just have one housekeeping announcements. Q&A will follow the keynote speech, but feel free to put your questions or comments in the chat window during this session. Thank you. So now I would like to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Barry Bozeman. Professor Bozeman is a Regents Professor and Arizona Centennial Professor of Technology Policy and Public Management and Research Director of the Center of Organization Research and Design at Arizona State University. His research focuses on science and technology policy, public management, organization theory, and higher education policy. He is the author of 17 books, including most recently Public Values Leadership, Striving to Achieve Democratic Ideals with Michael Crow. Professor Bozeman and his co-author decided to publish an open access version of this book so that their book would interest not only scholars, but also students and practitioners. With the permission of Professor Bozeman, I will be sharing the link to this open access version of this book in the chat during his speech. Other books include Public Values and Public Interest, which won the American Political Science Association's Herbert Simon Award for Best Published Book in Public Administration. His book, All Organizations Are Public, helped establish a new research and theoretical approach to the notion of publicness. He is an elected fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration and is a recipient of ASPA's Charles Levine Memorial Award, the NASPA Research Award, and the PMRA H. George Fredrickson's Award for lifetime achievements and contribution to public administration, public management research. The title of his speech for tonight is, tonight in my time, Public Servants Serving Democracy. What are the prospects for public administrators to preserve democracy even when their political superiors are undermining it? Please join me in welcoming Professor Bozeman. Professor Bozeman, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Given the seriousness of my title, I was planning on not really doing what I normally do when I give a talk and make it a little lighthearted and humorous, at least at the beginning. But I chose not to do that because, as some of you were able to observe, because I didn't turn the camera off, my office was just invaded by a couple of hornets. So when I was moving around with a great deal of activity, I was trying to save myself from being stung. And as we had said before, one of the things that is a danger about living in the deep woods in the mountains of Georgia is things like that happen. So I'm opening with a little bit of humor for unnecessary humor for a very serious topic. So my talk tonight is dedicated to the Select Committee of the U.S. Congress called the January 6th Committee, which is, I'm sure many of you know, even if you're not from the United States, is investigating what arguably is the single most devastating threat to American democracy since the Civil War. And so that, like many of my previous works, it's been inspired by politics. All of the books that were cited, they were mainly inspired by things I didn't like the privatization of the Iraq War, to Ronald Reagan's takeover of the hollowing out of government. And so it's always nice to be angry about something. And right now I've got a very good thing to be angry about. So my focus is on the chaotic times that we live in. And we do indeed live in chaotic times. We're witnessing the rise of a new fascism, national aggression, racism, and the entire interconnected set of problems that together threaten democracy in the US, but also elsewhere. So there's dark forces that have been operating in the United States for a few years, but also in many other places, Brazil, Egypt, Hungary, not least Russia. The list is a very long one. And there's also some strong neo-Nazi movements, even in places like Norway and Sweden, that we always have at the top of the democracy indices. Apparently no one is exempt. So many minds that are greater than mine are deliberating about causes of what I call the deformation of liberal democracy, and also about possible solutions. But my focus, of course, is not on the world's challenges to democracy and all their sources, but on the part I know maybe a little bit about, which is what should we expect from professional public administrators, and how can they help us protect us from threats to democracy? So this is not an easy question because, of course, there's an argument that public administrators have no more responsibility than ordinary citizens. Why should they? But I don't think most public administrators would think that. One of the reasons it's a difficult question is because of the power and often the value of what we refer to in public administration as neutral competence. In most cases, we prefer public administrators who are competent, efficient, loyal to their political superiors, and that's what we mean by neutral competence. It's a pretty good idea. We can go all the way back to Weber on the role of impartial bureaucracy, fulfilling official duties, exercising professional experience and expertise, and letting political authorities set the agenda. That doesn't mean that's always been the focus of public administration theory. At various periods of public administration scholarship, we've had calls for a new public administration, for self-actualizing public administrators, and for public administration to be guided by public interest values and public values, values that transcend the momentary political changes in the political scene. But setting aside neutral competence can have some really bad results. Sincere and well-meaning public officials, public servants, public administrators may have very different public values. For example, one may think that there's really nothing more important than the right to bear arms, and that protects our liberties, while the same sincere, public-focused person believes that that's the key to making sure that we do not have greater violence and school shootings and death. These are both legitimate values. They are at odds. And neutral competence can protect us from bending to personal values in opposition to legitimate policy and political authority that we expect public administrators to really worry about. My focus here, and actually focus on the research I'm doing now, is very simple. It's on the proposition that neutral competence sometimes is just not enough. So I don't really have a great concern about public administrators ignoring public policy and political authority and relying on their own values. That's not a great thing, but it's also not a great threat. When they do that, usually they are not able to do it for very long, even if they wish to. But there are some times when it is necessary to question authority. In some cases, we need to rely on public administrators saving us from elected officials, not from the legitimate public policies that govern our nations, but from the actions of public officials that are unethical, corrupt, are illegal, are, what I worry about most is what I refer to as deep corruption, activities that may be entirely legal, but they are legal because the political authorities in charge bent the law to their own interests. The gravest of all such deep corruption cases, in my view, is when duly elected public officials are the very ones who are subverting democracy. And in the United States today, that is rampant. It is rampant to a degree that honestly, I would have never believed would happen in my lifetime. And in fact, I think of myself as a normally very cynical person, and sometimes my cynicism does not treat far enough. So here's a question. How can a good public administrator argue against following the law? Well, generally that's a really bad argument leading to bad places, but it's not always a bad argument. What if the law itself embodies deep corruption? I have an outstanding example of this problem. How about the so-called Jim Crow laws in the United States? I don't want to do a great deal of US history here, but in fact, many of you may have heard of the Jim Crow laws because it is permeating American history and still does. The Jim Crow laws is the name of the sets of laws that were passed by Southern states after Reconstruction from our Civil War, the laws that basically abridged the rights primarily of African Americans, but also of other people. And basically, the objective of the Jim Crow laws was to continue to abridge those rights until about the 1960s, when definitive action really began to be taken on. But as someone who grew up in the American South, in Alabama and Florida and Georgia, I know well that those were the laws of the land. I know what their objectives were, everyone else did, and they were effective in those objectives. So we also have some other cases, but let me focus on this just for a moment. Ask yourself this: if you're wondering about legal transgressions and rebellion from professional public administrators, ask this question. During the era when the Jim Crow laws were at their zenith, what should public administration professionals in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia have done? Should they simply have followed the law? Well, as a minor student of Southern history, I can tell you that my judgment is that's exactly what they did. In most cases, what they did was to implement the laws faithfully as neutral, competent public administrators. We have similar issues with a rationale that we have for, well, in my view, a rationale that we have for many of the things that we do in the United States to subvert public values. In the United States, the Constitution, for good reasons and a few ill ones, is sacred. And many of our Supreme Court justices are originalists, which means that they think that we should not stray very far from exactly what the meanings of the so-called founding fathers happen to be. Well, were we to take that very seriously, then no one but property-owning white males would be allowed to vote. That was the original. Were we to look at the original Constitution as a guide, then Clarence Thomas, our first Black justice, would be eligible to be a slave, but he would not be eligible to be a Supreme Court justice. So obviously things happen institutionally, historically. Obviously those laws and those were amended, the Jim Crow laws were changed, but people are and were operating under those laws, ones that subvert other people's rights. In some cases, public administrators have been heroic in saving democracy by paying more attention to the need to do what was right rather than what political superiors dictated. One well-known historical hero in the United States is a person by the name of Mark Felt, who was an FBI agent who was finally identified as so-called deep throat informant in the Watergate scandal during the Nixon administration. If you want a much more recent example, a person that I had not long thought of as a hero certainly was courageous in one response. Vice President Michael Pence ignored his political superior's request to overturn the election, and for his trouble, he was targeted as for possible public assassination, from which he arguably narrowly escaped. So, being a professional trying to guard against the subversion of democracy is not always an easy business. So let's go here. If we have instances where we agree that neutral competence is not enough because the enemy may be our boss, what can we do? What are the options that public administrators can and have taken, and what should we encourage them to do? Let me run through just a few of these and evaluate them. So one of the most common and sometimes effective approaches to corruption or the deformation of democracy or other ills of governance is simply doing your job and waiting for the political tides to change. I've seen many cases where things that were clearly undermining basic values in the United States changed. New regimes came in. New brooms sweep clean is the cliche. Another possibility, that's one that sometimes works. Another possibility is going up the chain of command. You have a problem, you're a professional public administrator, you have a duty to discuss this with your boss, usually someone who's not an elected official. That's something that can have value, but it does not work unless you have someone who's courageous and sympathetic working with you. And in fact, it's also a very good way to be demoted. If you would like historical evidence, I'll be happy to provide later. Another possibility is the various activities of the so-called deep state, which is a term of derogation that is used by arch conservatives and also by former President Trump. But in fact, many people now use the term deep state. And in fact, there's much to be said of it. There is a sort of a deep state because there is a professional bureaucracy that continues from one administration to the next. The government is designed for that very purpose. So using a slanderous name for it does not necessarily undercut those designs in any way. So one of the reasons the deep state rebels is very simple. Sometimes the people they're rebelling against are their political superiors who were appointed to dismantle their agency and its activities. And there are many instances of that. One of the first things that oppositional presidents do is appoint people to be agency heads to run the agency into the ground. Well, defending the mission of the agency may not be viewed by professional bureaucrats as really a bad thing to do. They may view it as fulfilling their duty. So work slowdowns can occur, failing to quickly implement new executive orders can occur, and the deep state, in some cases, can save us. One thing that is often proffered as a means of helping defend democracy and against deep corruption is relying on established ethical standards. That is a much less powerful idea than it might seem. In the first place, and most important, if you look at government in general, but particularly the federal government, there's a wide array of professions, social work, physicians, legal profession, engineers that have their own very extensive, well-developed, and historically powerful ethical codes. How do we choose among those? Well, we can, of course, provide very broad sorts of ethical codes. I'm quite familiar with the ASPA code, for example, and it is what you would expect. It addresses ethics in the kind of breadth that you would have for what is an extremely heterogeneous population doing extremely diverse things. So ethical codes often are extremely useful for specific kinds of issues and problems, but when we're talking about something threatening the fabric of the United States, maybe that's not always the best answer. There was a book that many of you are familiar with that received a great deal of attention many years ago called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty by Hirschman. And he talks theoretically about some of these possibilities. The one most relevant to what we're talking about is exit. And in fact, that is exactly what a great many people do when a presidential administration or a state government administration comes into power, power and a government that they may not agree with, they simply leave. But there's many ways to do that. One of the ways to exit is to just leave. Sometimes that has power. Another way to exit is to leave and leave a resignation note, which happened a great deal in the Trump administration. Sometimes that has even more power. And of course, there's also whistleblowing. Whistleblowing doesn't necessarily assume exit because many people try to stay in their positions. I won't go into this a great deal because I'm sure many of you know more about whistleblowing than I do, except to say that while we try to protect whistleblowers and while whistleblowers have just been remarkably influential in historical instances, people like Mark Felt, Daniel Ellsberg, they often wind up in prison themselves or out of a job or in professional disgrace. And I think everyone knows that. So it's fraught with personal danger, and there's often possibilities of bad outcomes for the individual. Another possibility is what Rosemary O'Leary calls the guerrilla government. The guerrilla government is a notion, it's not unlike the deep state. There's people who get together who are like-minded. They have informal networks, they have resources, and they develop strategies to make sure, well, whatever the problem is, that democracy is not subverted, that their agency's mission is not subverted. And sometimes that can be quite effective. But again, it's usually a sort of a rearguard activity, and it's by necessity cannot be very much in the open. And so its impact can not necessarily carry the day. All of those are options, and none of those are the ones that I would particularly recommend. Well, let me put it another way. I would recommend all of them, but only in concert with one another. I don't think any of those solutions is going to do something like prevent a mob storming the Capitol of the United States and declaring an election fraud. I'm not sure anything will, but whatever we choose to do, in my judgment, it needs to be something that is more institutional. Let me give you some examples. So what I'm saying is that we need institutional approaches, not only individuals, no matter how courageous, to help respond to the destruction of democracy. And that's something that public administration cannot easily do. It is not now doing in any broad sense, but certainly needs to be considered. Some examples: a bolder role by the National Academy of Public Administration. I'm a member of that academy. I've served on many panels, but I'm also a member of the National, I'm a fellow of the American Association of Advancement of Science, and I'm also very active with the National Research Council, the National Academy of Science, and they have a bolder role for certain types of issues. And when they speak, people listen. I think people listen when NAPA speaks. They need to speak more often, more boldly, and more with more consensus reports. Another possibility, which is really not undertaken at all right now, is the Senior Executive Service Association. That's an association of people who are current or retired high-level officials who have who basically meet, they discuss issues. They usually do not deal with controversy and do not deal with issuing reports. But if you stop and think about it, the members of those organizations are the very core of public management in the federal government. It is conceivable that if they spoke, particularly since they are of necessity and a bipartisan group, if they spoke about the most dire issues, who knows, it might have an effect. Another more complicated issue is plebiscite triggers, which is, are there specific events that we could identify, things that are so fundamental that we could organize plebiscites among professional public administrators to have them speak, not in unison, and a public transparent voice. None of these solutions, I'm not even sure solutions is the word, none of these activities is really in place now. And none of these are going to be peremptory solutions if they were. But there's things that we need to do that are institutional rather than relying on heroes. Nothing wrong with being a hero, except, well, maybe you'll suffer a lot of pain and maybe you won't succeed, but we need something in addition to heroes. Also, neutral competence is not enough. But the problem of democratic deformation needs neither neutral competence nor only heroes. It needs to be attacked institutionally, head on, and not in secret. Professional public administrators who are trying to defend the very broad public interests need a voice. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Professor Bozeman, for those insightful and thought-provoking comments. My plan is that we go over Professor Patria DeLancer-Jonas' speech first, and then we will go over remaining questions. But I noticed that the chat function is disenabled right now, so we need to unmute ourselves if we have any questions at the end. So I just checked the chat is not working. So we now have the pleasure of having our next keynote, Professor Patria DeLancer-Jonas, to this session. Professor Patria DeLancer-Jonas is an internationally recognized scholar and consultant in performance measurement, government capacity building, and citizens-driven governance. She is the inaugural Rosenthal Endowed Professor of Public Administration and Director of School of Public Administration at the University of New Mexico. Her extensive academic publication record includes books, monographs, and articles published in highly regarded national and international journals. Her article, Promoting the Utilization of Performance Measures in Public Organizations, an empirical study of factors affecting adoption and implementation, was selected as one of the most influential articles in 75-year history of public administration review. Her books include Performance-Based Management System, Effective Implementation and Maintenance, and Innovation in Public and Nonprofit Sectors. She has also worked with governments and universities in Latin America and in Europe to improve education in and practice of public administration, building partnership to improve government capacity, support democratic governance, and address the needs of traditionally underserved populations. She is the recipient of ASPA's Donald C. Stone Service Award and the Julia J. Henderson International Service Award from ASPA's Section for Women in Public Administration. She is also an elected fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration, NAPA, and is currently president-elect of the American Society for Public Administration. The title of our speech tonight is Recasting Evidence-Based Decision-Making to Rebuild Resilient Communities Post-COVID-19. Please join me in welcoming Professor DeLancer-Jonas. Professor Jonas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And thank you, Professor Bozeman, for those very inspiring words. I took copious notes. Thank you. So as Professor Nam said, the talk of my the title of my topic is about evidence-based decision-making and how we build resilient communities post-COVID-19. Now, I said post-COVID-19, but the reality is that we don't know when COVID is going to end. But what we do know is that the pandemic, COVID-19, took many band-aids of the issues that for too long we have been willing to ignore, and willingly or not have continued to exacerbate. These issues, which are now too familiar, include lack of equity, social injustices, and lack of access to adequate healthcare and education. Another issue that the pandemic made clear is that we are interdependent. All parts of society are connected, and we are connected locally and globally. While this interconnectedness can have a very positive impact, the pandemic also showed that this relationship is very complex, and there are reasons for consternation. Addressing all these issues I have mentioned, sometimes called wicked issues, requires that we develop policies and programs using a systems perspective and consider the numerous networks that are part of the governance process. As if it wasn't evident already, the pandemic also revealed an urgent need for governments to implement policies and programs that increase the capacity for resilience. It also highlighted that there is nothing fixed or stable, but that instability and unpredictability are the norm. But the pandemic also put into question the common wisdom that government institutions are incapable of adaptation due to rigidity, fragility, and government institutions who want to maintain the status quo. The pandemic showed that government and society have an enormous capacity for flexibility, adaptation, and quick response. And perhaps one of the most impressive examples of such adaptation were how quickly we pivoted and moved most functions of society to the virtual sphere, from universities to hospitals, city councils, federal agencies, and local communities. We all responded with some form of adaptation and innovation. Another example is the development and manufacturing and deployment of vaccines in record time. These are things that we don't talk enough about, of how well we did in that case. These achievements were the result of rapid collaboration among many governance networks. Certainly, these responses have been called by some forced experiments, occurring during a state of exception caused by the surprising emergence of a virus that quickly became a pandemic. But irrespective of the state of exception, these forced experiments demonstrated that we can change. We can respond quickly and be ingenious. That resilience is in our genes. But at the same time, we didn't do enough. And a recent report by the OECD stated that much more could have been done before the pandemic to bolster resilience. I am afraid that these forced experiments will continue to happen. Not only can public health disasters such as COVID-19 happen again, but we also see that around us, around the world, the environment is unraveling. Water supply is precipitously decreasing. Forest fires, particularly here where I am in Albuquerque, are more abundant and destructive. Hurricanes are more deadly. Temperatures continue to rise, causing death and material devastation to humans and all living things. While there is a lot we can talk about regarding the many issues uncovered by the pandemic, in the rest of my talk, I'm going to talk about the need to build resilient communities and develop resilient systems of evidence for decision-making. I'm going to take for granted that resilience will be built so that all populations, not just some, can have a chance to thrive. And to some extent, as we discussed at the recent ASPA-EGPA Transatlantic Dialogue in Denmark, what I'm proposing here is that to address these wicked issues, we have to break them into smaller parts so that we can solve them, we can address them. And the systems of evidence can help. So let me provide a little background on the movement to replace governance for sustainability with governance for resilience. Then I will briefly discuss the role of performance measurement systems, and then provide some examples and conclude with some of the challenges that we face. Now, for some more than a decade now, the turbulence of the times has prompted observers to call for replacing the concept of sustainability with the concept of resilience. This is notwithstanding the UN sustainability goals. Proponents of this idea argue that sustainability, which traditionally has meant practices and solutions expected to lead to stability and reversals of past mistake. They argue that turbulence, basically what we are experiencing now, calls for resilience. the ability to withstand and absorb sudden shocks and disturbances, recover and transform while maintaining essential functions and identity. In the context of local government and community resilience, the Rockefeller Foundation 100 Resilient Cities initiatives describe city resilience as the capacity of cities to function so that people living and working in cities, particularly the poor and vulnerable, survive and thrive no matter the stresses or shocks they encounter. And these stresses and shocks could be natural or human-made disaster or pandemics and events, as we have recently experienced. But one key element of resilience strategy is building the capacity to make decisions during the shocks and stresses and effectively manage the programs intended to build and support resiliency. This capacity for decision-making requires information about the achievement of goals and strategies, and also using the information to make decisions. What do I mean by information about programs designed to build resilience? For example, in its resilience strategy developed as part of the Rockefeller Foundation's Resilient Cities Initiative, the municipality of Thessaloniki in Greece identified the development of a performance-based management system as one of its objectives to achieve the goal of building a dynamic urban economy, responsive city through effective and network governance. The resilience team, they set goals, mission, objectives, and performance baseline that could help the municipality improve the quality and delivery of city services and support priority sectors. These expectations for using evidence to reform practice have continued to rise, but the role of management decision-making tools such as performance-based management systems and program evaluation in support of resilience and agile decision-making has received little attention. But a recently published volume by my colleagues and dear friend Bert Perry and Tony Terrell on changing bureaucracies argue convincingly that evidence-based systems such as performance evaluation and performance measurement could help government and nonprofits adapt to the unpredictability of the times. They also lamented that program evaluation and performance measurement more often than not are required to assume that the environment is predictable. They are expected to assess performance based on measures set in advance, leaving very little room for assessment of emerging or unexpected outcomes and impact. The issue with this tradition is that resilience requires that both bureaucracies and the designers of evidence-based decision-making tools be flexible and allow for designs that support learning. In other words, evidence-based tools cannot be rigid if they are to be helpful. So I think most of you know what performance measurement is, so I'm not going to go deep into that. But let me just say, for example, how performance-based management uses information from performance measurement system for program learning, accountability, and improvement. And in general, this system focuses on results or are outcome-based. There is a large body of research on performance-based management and performance measurement. Most research agree on the potential benefits of these systems, but there's also agreement that the use of performance measurement in the public sector, despite of more than 20, 30 years of promoting it, and often fail to materialize. And the reasons given for this include the complex and ambiguous nature of public sector governance, the lack of integration of performance measurement with other management tools, organizational, cultural, and political barriers, and the purported difficulty in measuring outcomes for which organizations have little control. We should add to this list the rigidity with which assessment systems are often designed. They are designed to monitor specific indicators, sometimes missing crucial changes and outcomes in the environment. Despite these difficulties, we continue to believe that the potential benefits of PBM continue to inspire efforts to adopt such system. In particular, Elio Borgonovic, Carmine Bianchi, and William Riverbank have argued that the outcome orientation and long-term perspective embedded in performance-based management system are highly appealing for those interested in promoting resilience. But Except for indicators of financial resilience, the role of performance management helping to build resilient communities and governance has received very little attention. And also there seems to be little collaboration among scholars from different fields to help address the assessment needs of resilient strategies and the associated problems they try to address, which are not limited to financial shocks. They also include, for example, shocks to the political system, social unrest, collapse of infrastructure, the storming of the Capitol, migration, among others. At the same time, this unrelenting focus on financial resilience measure is understandable given how deeply financial crises affect local communities and the global economy. But scholars and practitioners recognize the limitations of those approaches and call for the inclusion of differing approaches and measures to measure resilience. And to that end, the OECD published guidelines to encourage system thinking in resilient strategies that include a broader view of the indicators of resilience that should be measured. They suggested, for example, that measuring resilience needs to include outcome, system resilience indicators, output, immediate results of implementing resilience activities, and process measures, indicators of proper implementation. In addition, they suggest that these indicators should be complemented by negative indicators to determine whether the implementation of resilience is causing negative impacts on another part of the system, and that you should use process indicators for when the indicators such as outcome measures cannot be measured directly. So I forgot to set up my timer, Professor Nem. How am I doing with time?
The time, you have enough time, so yes, so we're good.
Thank you very much. All right, so the work that I mentioned early of Borgonovi, Bianchi, and Riverbank is probably one of the very few works in public administration, specifically dealing with resilient public policies. These authors suggest that we develop more sophisticated models of dynamic performance measure to measure outcomes. And I have some examples, but I will move on. The related area of sustainability, the focus on financial sustainability has been criticized. That is, in the area of sustainability, scholars, practitioners are also criticizing this particular focus on financial sustainability. They call for a balanced approach to the evaluation of local government that includes dimensions of community sustainability and governance. And they argue that traditional financial ratios often fail to address good governance and the two other dimensions of sustainability, namely environmental and social factors. This also seems to suggest that performance measurement for sustainability is viewed as a system entirely separately from other performance management systems within an organization, instead of an integral part of effective management. With this in mind, the sustainability scholars often encourage administrators to integrate sustainability efforts into broader systems of performance measurement and management. And they also believe that administrators should communicate such measures to employees, as this is vital because employees at all levels are responsible for making decisions that ensure prolonged sustainability within an organization. And like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, they have increased the pressure on governments and organizations worldwide to develop measurable strategies for the implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. In addition, the Global Reporting Initiative has developed guidelines for sustainability, reporting that are increasingly becoming the most commonly used sustainability measures, but we still don't have that for resilience. So let me give you some examples of how performance measurement can help. So what I have discussed so far helps to explain the scarcity of research and examples of practice we find in public administration on how performance measurement helps resilience. So let's get back to the argument that part of the reason is that performance measurement systems tend to be rigid and often are untimely. So we need to develop more agile performance measurement data collection and reporting systems. and they should not become an added burden, but seen as complementary and essentially to service delivery. This is particularly important in the age of COVID-19 and climate change because we continue to learn as we go, and we need quick insights that allow us to make appropriate decisions. Let me illustrate. One example that I have is from the very first, days of the pandemic, and it was from the healthcare, dealing with the quality of care, quality of hospital care. An article published recently in the Journal of the American Medical Association said that data on quality care lags about 12 months. I mean, that's too late for us, for example, to correct disparities in care, particularly during times of shocks to the system. Is the data valuable 12 months after? Sure, but not as much in the short term. Now, when we needed to make timely corrections, which is exactly why we are supposed to be developing performance measurement system instead of waiting for a summative evaluation. During the early part of the pandemic, providers did not have timely information to determine if the rate of hospital-acquired infections for COVID-19 patients was higher than for non-COVID-19 patients. It was difficult to find out if there were disparities. And this is important to know because in the United States, the data has shown that among patients hospitalized with acute cardiovascular disease, pneumonia, or major surgery, Asians and Hispanic patients had significantly higher rates of hospital-acquired infections than white non-Hispanic patients. Providers also did not know the rate at which minorities versus non-minorities COVID-19 patients were intubated or given treatment. There was also difficulty learning with any confidence if treatments with corticosteroids made a difference in outcomes for patients with COVID-19. They didn't know with certainty if there was a difference in the intervention and the outcomes based on the demographic of patients. The performance information system in place were not agile enough to provide the appropriate insights on these issues. By the time those data were available, the opportunities for learning and improvement had been missed, likely resulting in what we already know, too tragic of outcomes. On the other hand, one example of a local government that made consistent progress toward developing agile performance measurement system and using decision-making approach is King County in Seattle, Washington State. As we learned in the pandemic early on, COVID-19 thrived in densely populated areas and in areas where lots of people congregate to play, study, or work. These populations are at risk. So King County developed a performance measurement system that included a measure on protecting high-risk populations. They use indicators such as number of outbreaks reported by week. And although their indicator system includes targets, King County acknowledged the nature of the pandemic. We are learning. I mean, even today, 2 years, we are still learning. And so King County viewed these targets as representing an ideal state, not a rigid expectation. The targets did not need to be met or not met to revert to an earlier phase of their safe reporting strategy or progress into another stage. And these targets and measures were not considered in isolation, but were part of a dynamic decision-making process that allowed them to take fast action and improve as needed. The county built a system based on listening and learning. But let us not think that the mere utility of performance measurement in increasing capacity for resilience secures the future of those systems in a modern time. These systems still need political support. Take as an example the actions of the Trump administration during the last weeks in power. During those weeks, it was probably like a Friday night, the Office of Management and Budget decided to exclude Part 6 from Circular A11. Circular A11 provides guidelines for preparing, submitting, and executing the federal budget. Part 6 encompasses the oversight role and agency performance reporting requirement, along with other strategic planning and evidence-based requirements, such as establishing and reporting on the accomplishments of metrics and goals for measuring performance of agency programs and activities. Now, these requirements from Circular A11, Part 6, they are based on an almost 30-year-old Government Performance and Results Act, which was followed by the Government Performance and Result and Modernization Act of 2010, a Digital Accountability and Transparency Act in 2014, which is also known as the Data Act, the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, passed in 2019. So with this long legacy, the abrupt exclusion of Part 6 was cause for alarm among many of us. While the Biden and Harris administration rescinded this action, it is important to take stock of what the exclusion of Part 6 meant, and most importantly, how we continue to work to ensure the future of performance management, accountability, and evidence-based policy and management in government. This is relevant not only at the federal level in the United States, but also at the state and local levels and in other parts of the world, because these practices and actions often percolate out down and affect all levels and across government. So in conclusion, during this post-COVID-19, or perhaps we should call it the era of COVID-19, since I don't know that there's any end in sight, but we will learn to live with it, we need to develop resilient governance to have resilient communities. Evidence-based decision-making tools can help, but they also need to be resilient and agile. And finally, let us heed Benjamin Clatch's advice and work toward a new form of ethos governance, one that is built on listening, learning, failing, and again, learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor DeLancer-Jones, for your valuable, insightful comments. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we will now get comments and reaction first from our audience. The chat function is now working, so feel free to put your questions or comments in the chat window, or if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. And if you have questions to a specific keynote speaker, you can address who you want to ask the question to. So go ahead. Are there any questions from the audience? So if there are, if people are still formulating the questions, I do have a couple of questions for you. It seems that although this was not mentioned during both of the speech today, but the running theme, the background of these two topics is that in an era of transformation, I believe trust towards government or decision-making authority is critical in preserving values of democracy and also building resilient communities through evidence-based decision-making. So in your view, what are different ways to restore trust towards government or any decision-making authority so that decisions could be made based on evidence, based on evidence, and also we're able to uphold democratic values? Like what are ways that we could restore trust towards government so that we can trust the actions of, unelected officials, or, trust the decision made through evidence-based decision-making? Professor Bozeman or Professor DeLancer-Jones?
Well, I am very interested in that topic. I'm also interested in the overlap of your question with COVID. I just wrote a paper that came out last week in a journal called Science and Public Policy that I don't remember the title of it, but it was something like, what does follow the science tell us about the use of science information? And of course, the difficulty with that question is a huge component of it has nothing to do with traditional issues of the use of science. It has to do with the fracturing of society, not government. But when we have echo chambers, when we have people, I think one of the most dangerous things that's happened in the United States, and I'm not being facetious, is that I literally don't know any one of my students, my graduate students, and I say this because I asked them, who has a daily newspaper. They don't even subscribe online. Basically, what they get is Facebook feeds, Twitter feeds, and of course, the algorithms in Facebook and Twitter give you what they think you want to know. I think that's extremely dangerous, and I think one of the things that we have to do if we're going to develop any trust in government is find some way to provide information to people in ways that do not necessarily feed only into their echo chamber. That is going to be an extremely difficult task. And of course, we also know, just to get even more extreme about it, look at the information about elections. Say Russia, there's no doubt now that Russia actually was providing false information in the last presidential election. So I actually feel sorry for people who are trying to keep informed. The young people who don't have a lot of experience with information access and making judgments about information channels, the credibility of different types of information. They don't have the heuristics that we do. And so I do know some people who genuinely want to be well-informed, and it's actually difficult. And when people cannot be well-informed and have confidence that they're well-informed, it's very difficult to trust government, particularly when there's people out there, God knows who, maybe robots, maybe Russians, maybe who knows, who are telling you not to do so. It's almost an insoluble problem.
Professor DeLancer Jonas, do you have any response to that question or reaction or comments?
Yes, well, my reaction is that yes, that is a very difficult thing because, as Professor Bozeman was saying, one of the issues that we have is this availability of, I don't want to call it information because it is not information, but it's just junk data that is being provided through social media. And because at least, we believe in freedom of speech, and we are reluctant to limit that kind of speech based on constitutional foundations and what have you, we have a problem. We have a big problem in our hand because that echo chamber that Professor Bozeman mentioned, that is going to continue, and that's where people are going to be. But I still think that universities have a role to play in this. And there was a long time, for a long time now, we have been talking about teaching people critical thinking. And it is an old concept, but it has become even more important because the reason why people just keep going to Facebook, Twitter, that's, to get information is because they don't think critically. They do not, and these are smart people. I'm not saying, I'm sure the students are smart, but for some reason, they do not take the time to actually question the information. Again, I don't want to call it information, but what they're getting from those. So I think that universities, we still have a very important role to play. I also think that really strengthening this sense of public service is important. And I think that just creating these efforts of public service among people who study public administration and who go into public and nonprofit service, that is another way in which perhaps, just perhaps, we can start to continue to revert this terrible deterioration in trust. But political parties and ideology seems to have a very strong sway in people. We are more divided than ever. This is not just the United States. We are seeing this in Latin America. Just this week, I think it was, in Colombia, it was a leftist former guerrilla that was elected. But that also tells us that whatever we have been doing have been leaving too many people behind. And so they are tired, they are sick and tired with the status quo that we have been providing for years. They don't see that they don't see how their own personal status and standing in society has improved. And so now they think that maybe trying this alternative will help. So we have a very complicated, almost like a cloud problem, like Karl Popper would say. We have a very complicated problem in our hand, and there's just no one solution. This is a multifaceted solution that also gets back to what Professor Bozeman was talking before in terms of this issue of neutralities and so forth. So I'm not going to belabor this, but all I'm saying is that we are entering in a very difficult time. I think that we as professors have a role to play, universities have a role to play, teachers have a role to play, and bureaucracies have a role to play.
Thank you for those comments. We have one question from the audience, Trang. If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask the questions directly. If not, I'll read the question in the chat window. So Trang, go ahead.
Sure. So I just thank you for your talk. Both of you, both are very inspiring, and yeah, give me a different perspective, new perspectives to look at recent events. I'm still trying to match it two together, because I believe there are strong connection between the two talks from two scholars. But right now, this is the only question that I managed to formulate, and it's short time, only like to Professor Bozeman, that you start your talk with the premise that you expect the administrators to recognize that there are problems in the current law, right? Like there may be some problems in the current law that challenge democracy, that may harm democracy, and the expectation is that they will have some response. They first of all, they will recognize it. But if the law is socially constructed in their time, or in their current time, right? How can we expect that they recognize that? Someone who lives in Jim Crow can very well implement the rule of the land, because they strongly believe that, and they don't see it as it's the harming to core value of democracy. How do we expect administrators or public administrators to recognize?
Well, that's an excellent question, and but I'm not only going to say that it's an excellent question, because I do think there's a couple of responses. The first response is my personal response, which is I do not expect them to. I hope they do. But to give you another personal response, I mentioned fleetingly as I was talking that I was a young boy growing up in places like Crestview, Florida, and Red Bay, Alabama, right in the middle of Jim Crow. And did I, as a young boy, suddenly say, "This is unjust, I want to grow up and fight it"? No, I just thought, well, this is what happens. Well, that's not entirely true. There were some episodes that jarred me out of that thinking. But I don't expect that much will happen. I haven't really, this is actually part of some research that I'm doing, and I haven't finished it. But I will say this, what I do expect is not that people can agree on what's corruption. I don't think they can agree on unjust laws. I agree with you that these things are not, there's not much consensus, and it is socially constructed. And you made up another very good point, which is historically constructed. In fact, that's one of the things I find very annoying, is we expect people today to have exactly the same values as 20-year-olds. And, if you grew up in the 60s, 70s, 50s, and you grew up in a different world, it's just unreasonable. So you have a very good point. But my request is simple. when you see something like what is going on right now, and I know this because it's in the Washington Post today, of people who are elected guarantors of elections in states taking public positions that they believe in the contraction of voting rights, read the paper today, that's not hard to figure out. When people are trying to gerrymander legislative voting districts so that people like you or me or whatever your group is are disempowered, that's not that hard to figure out. So I get your point. There's a relativism that I agree with, but I do think there's some sort of things that are just so fundamentally obvious that basically they can't be interpreted as anything except an attempt to disenfranchise people. And that's when I would like to see some action. We haven't much, but I hope we will. We did some. Remember what happened when Trump tried to rely on public officials to decertify the voting? All over the nation, most of them refused to do that because they realized that that was too much. So I think people can figure out the most fundamental things, but the more nuanced ones, I agree with you, it's almost impossible.
Thank you, Professor Bozeman. Professor DeLanzo Jonas, do you have anything to add, or should we move on to the other questions?
Oh, we can move on. It's fine. Thank you.
Oh, so Professor Choi Hung-seok from Korea University and former president of KAPA. Go ahead, Professor Choi.
Oh,
Hi, very glad to see you.
oh.
Okay, yeah. I have one question for you, and possibly I have another one for Patria. Maybe the neutral competence may not already be enough for the public administrators in South Korea, and then the lawmakers in South Korean National Assembly, they don't make laws as detailed as that as you have in the United States, and also the executive leadership. They probably hesitate, not probably, they hesitate to give the public administrator or administrators some detailed guidelines rather than maybe intervening.
Yes,
Yeah,
I like
it. So what is happening is that the public administrators oftentimes they make indeed the political decisions, and then in the sense that they make authoritative allocation of resources, while not realizing or accepting they are making political decisions, and then it has been creating some discrepancies in them, and it creates some problems with the political accountability of on the side of public administrators. But they have been learning American style dichotomy, the PA and politics dichotomy, and then we've been teaching that, and then they've been trying to align themselves with those theories. But these days they are becoming much more similar to American public administrators to some extent, I think. But another challenge is these days is that now people are realizing that performance of political system or politicians in South Korea is very much weak, and then there are many reasons for them to be worried.
Yes.
So maybe we are in need of maybe slightly new definition of the role of public administrators, or a possible division of possible new division of roles between PA and politics vis-a-vis public interest or public values. I like to listen. Maybe you would have some comments to the South Korean public administrators or the public administration scholars. And I have another very brief question. I'm afraid I'm taking too much time, to Patria. As we are experiencing MERS and then COVID-19, we now realize that there have been big discrepancies between SOPs that we have and the actual form of governance. And then now we have pretty much a big the pool of empirical data or evidences. And then thing is, we probably at some time we might need to combine or integrate, make use of those evidences to come up with a new design or new institutions. So I would love to have some comments on this regard. In a sense we have to make more sense of the things that have been happening, as we go through the MERS and then the COVID-19 pandemic. So what evidence-based policy making can talk to us instead of making some such suggestions. Okay, I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor Che. Professor DeLancer Jonas, can you go first, and then Professor Bozeman?
Okay, sure. You got me. Well, I mean, one of the things that we have that we see in the practice of performance-based management system is exactly that, where you have disjointed systems instead of integrated system. And then if you already have SOPs and then now you have some new empirical data, I mean, the idea is that what you need to do is really, first of all, determine how does this new data differ from your standard, your SOPs. I mean, what is that data telling you? And actually start doing what they call sense making from the data, so that then you can perhaps come up with some new standard operating procedures that you didn't have. The whole idea is that the new data or the new information that you have is supposed to help us learn and then change. The question is, are you able, or are you set up in a way to actually make agile decisions? Are you set up in a way in which you can actually change to make quick decisions based on the information? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that, but really it depends on how you are set up. Who do you have in charge? What kind of culture you have, and also I would say that there needs to be some collaboration between your public administration, health officials, and your public health people. And instead of seeing as two separate systems, we need to have this more integrated, because we can't really operate in silos. So I would love to see more of an integration and learning between these two separate systems.
Professor Bozeman.
Okay, thank you, Hansa, for those really good questions. I'm going to answer your questions, and then I have one for you. So, I visit Korea sporadically, at least, and I know a little bit about your public administration, and in most respects that I know about, is highly professionalized. In fact, among the most professionalized anywhere. And I was not aware, though I'm not at all surprised, that the sort of distinctions between politics of administration and politics of political elected officials is changing. That may not be good, I don't know, but it's not surprising that it's changing. So one of the things that I've always admired about Korea is, but I'm not sure this is a reason to admire, you tell me. I could write a little short story on Korea or do a documentary. I've already got a title for it. Mm-hmm. On the title, From the Blue House to the Jailhouse. Because, in the United States, we've had some presidents who've done terrible things, and I'm not going to mention anybody currently under investigation other than Donald Trump. We've had some presidents who have done some terrible things here, and they go away and they have their loyalists provide them money for non-existent re-election campaigns that they can spend any way they want to. they live off their name, they have a presidential library, and they're regarded as celebrities, even if they're completely ineffective, are completely corrupt. Somehow in Korea, you don't really have that history. So my question for you, and I know I haven't responded to all your question, is why is that? Do public or is it because your judicial system is different? I don't think it's because your politicians are more corrupt. I can't believe that. So what is it explains that? And specifically, what is the role of the civil servant focused, neutral competence, public administrator, and making sure that people come to account?
It's a very interesting and then but difficult questions to answer. In South Korea, we have a very long history of political maybe fight, and then also the from Lee dynasty, and then maybe another side is maybe we are overkilling, maybe we are too much wild with the rule of law, and then frankly I feel that we have to we are in the process of learning how to live with some that kind of difficulties created by the politics, and then the jailhouse problem also hurts public administrators. It's not just that it's not just hurting those guys who went to jail. So I hopefully see. Okay.
Minds trust. How does it hurt them?
Okay. Just.
In what ways are public administrators hurt by the corruption of the politicians? I believe you. I'm just not sure specifically what.
The connection was not very good at the time you talked.
Yeah. So you said that public administrators were hurt by the corruption of politicians, but how are they hurt? In what ways are they hurt? Because
there are certain public administrators who find themselves in jail as well. Okay. So nowadays the way they interpret conduct, implement code of ethics are changing actually. Mm-hmm. So they are becoming much more defensive, and then rather than they used to be very proactive in terms of seeking public interest. Nowadays they are becoming, I should say, maybe a little bit more cynical, and then more defensive. They go by rules, and then and it will hurt actually maybe public interest or general interest in South Korea.
Oh, that makes sense. Sure.
So we do have two more questions, but our time is actually up. So if the two questions from James and then Professor Zhang, if you can reach directly out to Professor Bozeman and Professor Patria del Lancer Jonas, I really appreciate it. I'm really sorry because we have a hard stop at 11 p.m. Or 12 p.m. in Korean time. So our time is up. Is there any, if there is one thing to those keynote speakers, one thing you would like this audience to take away from this session, what will be one message, one last word to the audience before we end? Professor.
I'll go second. I'd be happy to go second. Well, I guess I will have to go first, but if there's a message that I would like to take away, it is that if what we're trying to do is make public administration more effective, then we not only have to be concerned about the performance of public administrators, the honesty of people who are political officials, we also need to work very hard to make sure that those who are being served not only have transparent means of knowing how they're being served, but the knowledge and the social norms to be able to understand it and to encode it and to figure out how they should interact. Because many of the problems we have with at least US democracy are changes in the nation and the citizenry itself and the level of information they have.
Thank you, Professor Bozeman. Professor Patria de Lancer Jonas.
Just very quickly, basically, I would say that we need to put public service first. And that if we put public service first, hopefully we are going to do everything we can to improve the lives of all citizens, not just some, and ensure that everyone has a chance at the good life. And I think we talk about a couple of ways here in which we can start towards that goal of the good life.
Thank you so much. Again, I apologize for the 2 questions from the audience that we can't cover it right now. So thank you, Professor Bozeman and Professor Del Lancer Jonas for this crucial and thought-provoking discussion. On behalf of the KAPA Conference Committee, we hope that this conference offers additional opportunities to extend this discussion beyond this session. And one other thing is that I did put the book, the most recent book by Professor Bozeman. It's an open access book. So if you can check out the chat, the link to the book is available there. Once again, thank you again for attending our opening plenary. And I hope that you are able to participate in these other sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, June.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
very
Thank you.
much. Thank you for
Bye.
coming. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.